We are going to skip chapter 2.6 for just a moment. If you're watching this somewhere else, then it doesn't really make sense, but I'm doing chapter 2.7 in class before 2.6 because I want them to have more time to work on proportions. What is a proportion? Well, in order to answer that question, you first must answer the question of what is a ratio, and a ratio is a fractional representation of two numbers. In other words, you could think of a ratio as just a fraction. So we have 4 over 5, 11 over 17, 7 over 3. Those are fractions. Once it's based off of a relation, then it becomes a ratio. So again, it's just a fancy word for fractions. For example, if it took 4 hours to paint 5 fences, these two numbers are attached. That would be a ratio for 4 hours to paint 5 fences. If Joseph rode his bicycle 11 miles in 17 minutes, these two numbers are attached because you go 11 miles in 17 minutes. That would form a ratio or a fraction with the numbers 11 and 17. If Jasmine can feed 7 guests with 3 cans of spaghetti sauce, these two numbers here are attached, 7 guests with 3 cans of spaghetti sauce, which means that this, even though it is a fraction, could also be considered a ratio as well. Once you understand the idea of what a ratio represents, then you can look at what a proportion is, and a proportion is the result of setting two ratios equal to each other. Any math problem in which one fraction is set equal to another fraction, you will use the skill of expanding proportions. So the essential question for today is, how is solving proportions different than solving equations? And really, once you learn how to expand a proportion, there is no difference at all. In terms of strategy, the expanding part is just a step that leads to a basic solving problem. So it's almost like solving equations and solving proportions is related, but it's not the same thing. Once you expand it, it's just going to turn into an equation, and you'll see how easy it is from there. The key thing that you need to learn or focus on, though, is that the new information is just on how to expand the proportions. So looking at these examples real fast, here's how you expand proportions. You do something called cross multiplication, and you want to make sure, especially on your Math Excel, that you use parentheses when you expand it, otherwise it will be wrong. X meets 11, so you'll do x times 11. You will set it equal to the cross multiplication of that, which is 6 meeting 2. I'm not going to simplify that because we'll have enough practice on that, but this is the expansion of how you do that. Alright. When you look at this one, cross multiplying, again, this is a proportion because you have a fraction on this side equal to a fraction on that side. In this case, x plus 5 will meet 6. Set that equal to 2 meeting 9, which is 2 times 9. That is your expansion. Now again, you can flip the 6 times x plus 5, you can flip the 9 times 2, but you just can't connect the 6 with the 2 or the 6 with the 9. It has to be diagonal from whatever you are putting together. And then if you were asked to expand this one, you would do x plus 6 meets 3, set it equal to 7 meeting x minus 2. The reason you want to use parentheses, which is why I'm making you use parentheses in Math Excel, is because what some people do on accident is when they cross multiply, they put 3x plus 6. But if you look here, you can see that it should be 3x plus 18, because 3 also must multiply by the other number. Now once you practice enough, you don't need parentheses because you know it's going to be 7 times x and 7 times 2. But again, in terms of expanding it, that is the only new information that you have, is making those cross multiplications meet up. Be sure not to confuse an equation containing fractions with a proportion. This is not a proportion. 2/3 equals x over 5 plus 1, because that throws it off. It must be one fraction equal to one fraction. It can't be 2/3 equals x over 5 plus 2 over 7, because that's two fractions over here with one over there. It has to be fraction equals fraction in order to use this skill that we're talking about, where we expand it and go from there. In terms of application problems, just be sure to link the units. Okay, so if we're looking at application here that Joe earned $17 in the first 3 hours of work, how long will it take to earn $50? We're going to look at a few options. First off, the relationship here is that it took $17 in 3 hours, so you could put 17 over 3 equals, and then make your fraction bar. And here's what I mean by relating your numbers. The other number in this problem is $50. $50 relates to 17, which means 50 should be up top with the 17. And we don't know how long it will take, which is why we'd put a x down there. Just to show you, you could also relate 3 and 17 as 3 over 17. I mean, this would probably be the best way to do it, but again, if you do it a different way, as long as you don't break any major rules, you could start with 3 hours and $17, as long as you remember again that 50 and 17 are related, so 50 has to go where the dollars are, where the 17 is. Since dollars is on the bottom here, 50 is on the bottom. If I had put dollars on the top, 50 is on the top, X is over there, but notice in either way, I'm doing 17 times X, I'm doing 3 times 50, and so you're going to get the same answer no matter what. You could, as a third option, simply put the dollars in one fraction, so 17 over 50. The thing you'd have to do with the 3 is understand that the 3 is directly related to the 17, not the 50, because it took 3 hours for $17, which means that 3 would go here, X would go there, but again, notice you're still multiplying 17 times X. You're still multiplying 3 times 50 in each of those. Either one of those 3 is good. I think the best way to do it is to take whatever your first sentence connects and just put those into a fraction of 17 over 3 and then go from there. But again, however you get that done is up to you whenever you get there. Again, the Math Excel is set up to make you type some of that stuff in, so you have to get it right before you can move on to anything else. Looking at some examples all the way through before we get ready for our Math Excel or our homework. Here, again, looking at this, 15 over X equals 8 over 7. Notice it's a fraction equals a fraction. So this is a proportion, which means that 15 meets 7, and then X meets 8. From there, we simplify. 15 times 7, which is 105. X times 8, of course, is 8x. Now we need to divide by 8. Divide by 8. And I believe that's as far as you can go with 105 over 8. And it is. So that would be it. 105 over 8 would be your answer for X. There are fractions, there are decimals on this work. Make sure you read your answer to see. It usually says integer or fraction, or it says integer or decimal. But just make sure you read your directions. In the next one, you've got 26 meeting X with 29 meeting 13, kind of like a distributive property thing here, where we get 26x equals whatever 29 times 13 is, which is 377. You divide by 26. And again, 14.5, or if they wanted a fraction or did not want a decimal, which I don't think they usually do, that turns into 29 over 2. So again, just make sure you're ready for your fractions, make sure you're ready for your decimals, and make sure that you read your answer there, because usually on Math Excel it usually has something that says write your answer as a whatever it might be. So again, if it's a decimal or a fraction, it's going to pretty much tell you which one it wants. The next one here, x minus 2 meets up with 6, and 8 meets up with 3. This, off of your distributive property, turns into 6x minus 12. Remember, it's going to be 6 times x and 6 times 2, and that equals 24. The next thing we do is solve by moving the number that's being added, so 6x equals 36. Then dividing by 6, you end up with x equals 6. The importance of that quiz that we took last week was that you need to know how to solve from here down, and those of you who did at least decently well are about there, which is where you need to be. You should always be able to get home from this location here. It's just going to be the work you have to do before getting there that is going to be different. Here, x minus 1 meets up with 9, and 6 meets up with x plus 1. This turns into 9x minus 9. This turns into 6x plus 6. This is now simplified, and remember the first thing we have to do is move our x's, so we now have to move our 6x over here, giving us 3x minus 9 equals 6, and from there again you should be able to get home safely, where we simply add 9 to both sides, getting 3x equals 15, dividing by 3 to find out that x is 5, and going from there. Now again, you could plug those fractions in just to see, and you'd find out what was going on with that, but I'm not really going to do that right now. If you want me to show you that, feel free to bring your paper up and I will show you why these fractions are actually true. But you could honestly just take the 5, plug it into this fraction, see what it equals, take the 5, plug it into that fraction, see what it equals, and it will be the same thing because it is algebra, and it has to be the same in order to be equal. 2 application problems before we get ready to go on to the work. One of them says an airplane travels 680 miles in the first 4 hours of a 950-mile trip. It wants to write and solve a proportion to find the total amount of time needed to complete the trip. Again, the easiest way to do this, as I said, is to take the first 2 numbers that are attached. They traveled 680 miles in the first 4 hours. I would just put 680 over 4 and then set up my fraction. I would then look for the third number, which is 950 miles. Again, the other number that talks miles is 680, which means that 950 is linked up with 680. And so that means that t, which is what we're looking for, should be down here on the bottom. And once I get it set up right, you just go ahead and work it out. 680 meets up with t, and 4 meets up with 950. Of course, making this 680t equals 3800. Now we divide by 680. And we have, typically in this case they probably want a decimal round to the nearest hundredth, but I don't know what the computer is going to want. But for me that would be 5.59 hours is what the total time would be needed. But if you think about it, this is the total time, that is the answer they want. But if we already rode the first 4 hours, it means we should have 1.59 hours left. So just using a little bit of logic on that. Last one says a chef is preparing for a banquet. If one cake can feed 17 guests, how many cakes will the chef need to feed 280 guests? Now the trick here is that you only see 2 numbers. But you have to remember that what they like to do is sometimes they put their numbers in word form. 1 cake, 17 guests. That is my ratio. Again, 1 cake feeds 17 guests. Now what we're going to do is look at the other number, which is 280 guests. Again, the number that represents guests is 17, which means 280 should be down here. And we need to know the number of cakes. Again, 1 cake for 17 people, x cakes for 280 people. Now we cross multiply. 1 times 280, 17 times x. So 280 equals 17x, and then we divide by 17 to find our answer. And we get 16.47. So they want to know how many cakes will the chef need to make to feed 280 guests. Here's the tricky part here, and this is where you got to use your common sense there. Yes, we get 16.47, but you can't really make 16.47 cakes. And even though you would round it to 16, 16 would not make it to 280 because 16.47 is. And so in order to actually feed the 280 people, you would need the extra information or the extra material from the 17 cakes, because 16 is not enough. Again, based off of the fact that you want 280 guests, 16 is not enough because you need 0.47. And so even if it was 16.1, you have to round it up to 17 in that case. Alright. So just remember that the only new step in terms of solving proportions is in expanding the proportion, where you have to cross multiply and have the 2 things meet up. Again, be sure to use formal steps when they are challenging. That way you don't make a silly mistake in pursuing the solution and cause yourself a bunch of frustration. So other than that, again, make sure you work hard, ask questions, and get as much as you can out of the day, because you do have a quiz coming up in the end of the week. Good luck.